Did I choose to end my pregnancy because our baby would suffer, even though my husband wanted to keep going? The ultrasound room was cold and quiet, almost too clean, and I could feel the chill on my back as I lay there, waiting for the doctor to come in with the results. Dan, my husband, was holding my hand, but his mind was somewhere else. His eyes fixed on the screen where we had just seen our baby moving, little limbs and heartbeat fluttering in shades of gray and black. I had always pictured this moment as one of pure joy, imagining that we'd be walking out of the office hand in hand, giddy with excitement. But instead, I was gripped by an overwhelming feeling of dread. The technician's face had been a mask of professionalism, but there was something in her eyes that told me everything wasn't right. I couldn't shake it. I clung to Dan's hand, looking for reassurance that I wasn't alone. But his fingers were cold and limp. He wasn't really here with me. The wait felt endless. When Dr. Thompson finally walked in, his expression told me all I needed to know before he even opened his mouth. I could see it in his eyes: pity, discomfort, a softening of his usual brisk confidence. I swallowed hard, steeling myself as he took a deep breath. "There's no easy way to say this," he began, and then proceeded to tell us that our baby had trisomy 18, a rare chromosomal condition. His words felt distant, as if they were echoing in from another room. Trisomy 18. I'd heard the term before, but never paid it much attention. I wasn't supposed to need to know about these things. Our baby wasn't supposed to have these kinds of issues. Dr. Thompson went on to explain the condition, the challenges our baby would face if they survived birth at all: severe heart defects, delayed growth, a high likelihood of miscarriage or stillbirth, and, if they made it through all of that, a life filled with surgeries, constant care, and significant physical and cognitive disabilities. I couldn't process the words he was saying. Dan was staring at the doctor, his eyes wide and wet, his mouth set in a tight line. When the doctor finally stopped, there was a silence so deep that I felt like it might pull me under. He was giving us options, explaining them carefully, but I could barely hear him. The words termination and carrying to term floated in and out of my consciousness, but my mind was numb. Afterward, Dan and I walked out of the clinic in silence. The sun was shining too brightly for a day like this, and the sounds of the city felt abrasive, as if the world were mocking us with its normalcy. We sat in the car, not moving, not speaking, just staring straight ahead. After what felt like hours, Dan finally broke the silence. "We'll get through this," he whispered, his voice a mixture of determination and desperation. "We'll figure it out." I turned to him, the shock wearing off, replaced by a hollow ache that I couldn't quite put into words. "Dan, did you hear what he said? Did you hear how hard this would be? How much our baby would suffer?" My voice cracked on the last word, and I bit my lip, forcing back the tears. He nodded, though his gaze was fixed somewhere out the window. "I know," he said, but we can't just give up. This is our baby. We owe them a chance. Don't we?" A chance. The phrase felt bitter in my mouth. What chance was he talking about? A chance at a life filled with pain, hospitals, and inevitable loss? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Dan, this isn't about giving up. This is about what's best for our baby. Do you really think it's right to bring them into a life of suffering?" His eyes darted to mine, and there was a fire there that I hadn't seen before. "How do we know that? How can we say for sure what their life will be like? The doctors, they don't know everything. People defy odds every day." I felt my heart sink. I could see the path this conversation was taking, the divide growing between us, the chasm that our differing beliefs and fears would carve. But Dan, we're not talking about odds. This isn't about hoping for the best. It's about facing reality, about making a compassionate choice. His jaw clenched, and he shook his head. "No, it's about fighting. It's about not giving up on our child. I can't just let them go like that." The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Each morning, I woke up hoping it was all just a bad dream, that I'd wake up and everything would be okay. But the reality was always waiting for me. I felt like I was drowning, barely able to keep my head above the surface as I struggled with what to do. Dan and I spent hours talking, arguing, crying, each of us desperately clinging to our beliefs, to what we felt was the right choice. Friends and family tried to offer support, but no one could understand the weight of what we were facing. My mother, bless her heart, tried to be supportive, though I could tell she struggled to hide her discomfort. My best friend, Julie, was more blunt. "You have to do what's right for you," she said. squeezing my hand. No one else can make this decision but you. It should have brought comfort. But instead, it felt like a burden. The responsibility, the enormity of the decision, weighed on me until I could barely breathe. I spent sleepless nights researching trisomy 18, reading stories of other families who had been through this. Some chose to carry to term, holding on to hope and love despite the odds. Others chose to terminate, their hearts heavy but resolute. There was no right answer, only pain and loss no matter what path we took. I found myself resenting Dan, angry that he couldn't see things from my perspective, that he clung so stubbornly to hope that felt naive, unrealistic. And yet, deep down, I understood. I could see the love he already had for our baby, a love so fierce that it blinded him to the harshness of reality. I didn't know if that made him noble or foolish. But either way, it left us at an impasse. One evening, after yet another argument, I sat alone in the nursery we'd started to put together. The crib was half-built, baby clothes folded neatly in the dresser, untouched and waiting. I sat in the rocking chair, my hand on my belly, feeling the small flutters of life within me. And I broke down. The room felt like a cruel mockery of the future we'd imagined, a future that now seemed so distant, so impossible. The next day, I told Dan I was ready to make a decision. I asked him to sit down, and I could see the weariness in his face, the sadness etched into his features. This whole ordeal had aged us both, stealing our joy and replacing it with a sorrow that we couldn't escape. I can't do this, Dan, I said softly, my voice trembling. I can't bring our baby into a world of suffering. I love them too much to put them through that. He didn't say anything, his face pale, his hands clenched into fists. After a moment, he looked away, tears streaming down his face. I thought we could do this together, that we could be strong enough. We are strong, I whispered, reaching for his hand. But sometimes, being strong means making the hardest choice, the compassionate choice. He pulled his hand away, shaking his head. I can't do it. I can't. Just let them go. The words cut deep, but I knew that he was grieving just as I was. We were both broken, our hearts shattered by a choice we never wanted to make. But I also knew that I couldn't waver. I had to be firm, even if it meant standing alone. In the end, we went through with the termination. Dan was there, silent and withdrawn, a shadow of the man I'd fallen in love with. I could see the pain in his eyes, the anguish that he couldn't express, and it broke my heart all over again. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him that I understood. But the chasm between us was too wide, too deep. In the weeks that followed, our relationship became a fragile thing, held together by thin threads of shared grief and guilt. We barely spoke, each of us lost in our own pain, our own regrets. The house felt empty, as if the life we'd once shared had vanished, leaving only memories and echoes of what could have been. One night, as we lay in bed, each of us facing away from the other, I whispered into the darkness, "I'm sorry." I didn't know if he heard me, but it was all I could say. I was sorry for the pain, for the loss, for the choice that had torn us apart. But I wasn't sorry for doing what I believed was right, even if it meant losing the man I loved. In time, we started to heal, but the scars remained, reminders of the life that never was. I don't know if we'll ever be the same, if our marriage will survive the weight of what we went through. But I do know that I loved our baby enough to make the hardest choice of my life. And maybe, in some way, that love will be enough to carry us forward, even if we have to walk separate paths to find our way back to peace.